Hi everyone. So today I have the whiteboard out, and what I'm going to do is do a bit of a lengthy video, I guess, reviewing my sabbatical. Both going over the achievements I pulled off, and then also going over some considerations if you yourself are perhaps thinking of doing this, kind of going over the pros and cons of why someone might want to do it, and then things to keep in mind if you're going to basically consider doing this. If you're not as interested in going over, I guess, my achievements, if you're not interested in kind of recapping what I did during my sabbatical, you can kind of skip ahead. I'll be standing on the other side of the whiteboard here when I'm going over the considerations. So if you're here just for the practical advice, just skip ahead in the video. For everyone else, though, we're going to be going over my achievements first. The reason why is not to brag or anything like that, but I'm hoping to show you what you could also pull off if you decide to go on a sabbatical yourself. So, my sabbatical lasted 5 months. So, it lasted 5 whole months from the month of February up through June. Starting in July, I'll be going back into the workforce. So, 5 months. What I was able to achieve in those 5 months was, I would say, pretty substantial. So, first thing is, I wrote a first and second draft of one novel. It was 110,000 words, the novel. A little bit more than that after the second draft making the cut. So maybe close to 120,000 words. So just keep that in mind. I wrote 120,000 words, and then I also went through and did a second draft of just, going over structural changes as well as doing basic line edits as well. Pretty lengthy. I think most people, a first, second draft takes quite a while. So keep that in mind, 120,000 words. And then I wrote 2 drafts of a second novel. For those who are following along, this was my tarot novel. This was the one the publisher was looking at that I had to make changes. So that I did 2 drafts. I did a second draft. I did an initial draft that involved adding on about 20,000 words to my original manuscript. So I actually added on some words to my manuscript. And then I did a final draft where I went through and I did trimmings of both the newer section that I added as well as the original section. So keep that in mind, added about 20,000 words there, and then basically did a trim of those words and actually revised an entire draft of tarot that I had already written as well. So 2 drafts, but really it's probably closer to 3 when you look at kind of the amount of work. Finally, I wrote 2 short stories in that time period. That was a lot. Like in total, if you're looking at kind of the word count basically for this, the amount of work that gets done, this is a lot to get done in 5 months. However, because I was on a sabbatical, because I was not working, the volume of work was not that much. It was pretty manageable where I was working, on my writing about 2 hours at the lowest points, up to potentially 5 hours a day. So between 2 to 5 hours a day, I was writing and I managed to pull this off. Just something to keep in mind with that, giving you an idea of what you need to do to pull this off, or as far as what you can achieve basically if you decide to go on your own type of sabbatical here. All right, so 2 drafts, and 2 short stories. A lot done. Okay. Now I'm going to jump over here and I'm going to go over considerations if you yourself are maybe interested in going for your own sabbatical. All right, so let's go over the considerations now. For those that are kind of curious now, I did just add an additional tip. As I was sort of filming this, an idea came to me. Probably the largest takeaway that I've gotten has been the idea of going off the grid. I'll explain that more in a minute, but for now, just in case you're wondering why it's up there, the idea just came to me of an additional tip for everybody. But starting with the main idea. Before considering doing a sabbatical, you have to know your personality. The reason why is if you are not someone that's a risk taker, if you are someone that considers themselves to be risk averse, if the idea of not having an income for several months and sort of just trusting that you're going to figure a way out of it, if that scares the hell out of you, this is not going to be for you. This will probably not be something you want to do because a lot of the sabbatical, a lot of taking one, to be honest, is an element of self-reliance and also learning how to kind of accept that you are your own rescue. You are the one that needs to figure this out. There's an element of just, I guess, just general survival here, right? Where there's no guaranteed income anymore. You need to just trust that at the end of this, you're going to find a way to get a job after this whole thing is over. I'll get to more of that in a minute. And there are ways to mitigate this. There are some companies I'm aware of that do allow sabbaticals, that will allow you to keep your job at the end of this. So you can go for several months and then come back. Those aren't a lot. Those aren't very frequent positions there. You don't see a whole lot of that. A little bit of backstory. The reason why I took my sabbatical was that I had initially requested one with my employer. My employer actually allowed this. It was not a paid sabbatical. It would be just something where I could take up to 6 months off. My position would be held at the company, and then I would return at the end of 6 months to my old position. My benefits would stay the same, pay and all that. They ended up denying my request. This HR basically had the discretion. They ended up denying that. That certainly is what it is, and I ended up taking one anyways. So, despite I guess getting the nice cushy nice cushy position of hey, being in a place where my company allows it, I still ended up taking it. I ended up quitting my job completely and ended up securing a new one now. But just something to keep in mind, that's really the crux of the main thing I want to get across to everyone first is know your personality. Because again, if you're not risk averse, if the idea of just not having an income or not having potentially having certain benefits, like potentially not having healthcare, dental care, something like that, if that scares you, this probably is not for you. And I would understand why. Like this is a risk. Like, to be frank, this is a risk. Everything I'm going over here is very risky. I was very fortunate, obviously, that I have a spouse that does have benefits, so I was able to use hers. But really, other than that, a lot of this was just, hey, being down to just a single income household, very, very risky. So keep that in mind. This is very risky. This does require a lot of forethought. This is not something where I am telling you to go do this. This is something that to kind of play around this idea. But that needs to be the first thing, is just know your personality. If you are, again, risk averse, if this scares you at all, the idea of it's not worth it, because you're going to spend every day on your sabbatical instead of enjoying it, instead of using that time to work on your writing, to perhaps rediscover yourself. Yes, that is a weird sort of new age word. I understand that. But there is an element of that too. When you are not working 8 hours a day and you have free time to write and work on things that you enjoy, you do discover, you do sort of rediscover yourself. You do kind of, sort of examine yourself to a degree, and you kind of come to a new understanding of who you are as a person. I definitely think that happened with me. That was very much a side benefit. Again, that's a great thing to have. Unfortunately, if you are risk averse, you're going to be stressing out every day. So do not do this if you are someone that considers themselves to be very risk averse. But now, going into it, let's go over the more practical considerations now, the more tangible things. First thing is habits. Before even doing a sabbatical, examine your habits. Are you writing consistently? And do you have a daily schedule? In other words, it doesn't make sense to take a sabbatical if you aren't writing consistently. If you cannot write, for the most part every day, yes, perhaps you can do 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, take weekends off. Yes, that is a workable thing. I do believe that could be done. But if you can't write consistently most days, don't do it. Do not take a sabbatical, because you're wasting time, right? You're not going to get these projects done. If you have these lofty projects, you are not going to get them done if you're not being consistent. So first thing is habits. Are you writing consistently? I don't necessarily have a timeline on how long you should be writing consistently for without taking a break. I would say if you're writing on perhaps a 5-day a week schedule, and you've been doing it for maybe 6 months perhaps, then yeah, and the habit's been ingrained, then yes. It takes about 66 days to develop a habit. So keep that in mind. So 66 days. So if you've been doing it 2 or 3 months basically of writing almost daily, very consistently, putting a good work output out, then boom, good to go. If not, focus on that first. Focus on developing the discipline of the habit first, because again, the sabbatical is going to be a waste if you do not write consistently, if you don't take advantage of the time. For me, that was the reason why I didn't stress out during this. The big reason why I justified doing this to myself was I was working every day. I was writing every single day. I was not at a day job. That became, in a sense, my day job. And if I was not doing that, if I didn't do that, I would be guilting myself every single day. That's kind of the person that I am. I'm willing to take a chance on some of my dreams here, but if I'm not putting the effort in, I'm just going to guilt myself because you're wasting your opportunity. So first thing is to make sure you have the habit. Make sure you have the consistent habit, and make sure you have a schedule as well. A lot of the sabbatical with the free time, basically, there's a lot of time to mess off. There's a lot of time where you could spend on Facebook, on YouTube, on whatever social media you want to use. You could spend hours just sitting there doing that, blowing all of this time away, just pissing it away, to be frank. So make sure you have a schedule. Make sure you're able to write on a consistent schedule where you say, all right, I got 3 hours to write. Can you actually write in 3 hours? Can you write for an hour and a half, take a short break, come back, another hour and a half of writing? Can you do that day in, day out, just as an example, during this select time block? If you can't develop that skill first, this could be the first thing you work on, is the habit. Second consideration is, where is your current writing skill? And this is where I'm going to kind of disappoint some people here. I would say if you have not been writing somewhat consistently for 4 years, to wait. Do not do a sabbatical yet. The reason why is twofold. The main reason is you're going to make progress regardless. So in other words, you'll make progress writing 1 hour every night after work for 4 years, then you'll still make progress at. You'll still make good progress at just that pace of just maybe an hour a night after work, and then maybe a couple extra hours on the weekends as well. You'll make way more progress doing that than you would just chunking your time. Yes, chunking your time into a 6-month block is great, but it's not necessary. You can still make good gains. I use the term gains here. You'll make great gains just doing that for your first couple of years, because a lot of the stuff for the first couple of years, a lot of what you're writing is a lot of crap. Let's be frank. It's not the best. Even the parts that are really good, that when you're say you're 3 years in, right? You write something that's really good. That's probably the exception rather than the rule. That's probably the one day of brilliance, right? That's probably you get that one good sentence, that one good paragraph, that one good chapter. It's really, really awesome, right? That could probably be published, right? If you wrote everything else that same quality, but it's inconsistent, right? You can't put that out on a daily rate yet. You don't have the sort of, you haven't put the time in basically at the desk, to be frank, to be able to do that consistently. And you probably also have not been, necessarily, you haven't read the widest breadth of books yet. Perhaps you have, but I think most people, when they write, they haven't necessarily read a large plethora of books. I tend to find people, when they start writing, they've read for a lot of years maybe, but it's not necessarily books that are ones that can help your craft. They're not books you can analyze. And certainly if you are reading, you haven't learned how to analyze yet. There are a lot of small habits that come in, a lot of small things that you develop over the first couple of years you're writing that you want to have first. By the time you take your sabbatical, you should already have a skill level, I believe, that you should be close to publication, in the sense that if you put maybe another 1 to 2 years, maybe you could get a book published. You'd have at least a coin toss of a chance of getting published at that point. And within the first 4 years, it's pretty difficult. I think I mentioned before, basically, it takes usually, most authors, it takes about 10 years, guys, to get published. It really does. Most if you get published before 35, you're very, very lucky, just traditionally published. And, and those are people that probably started writing in college, to be frank. So first 4 years, you can gain a lot just by writing at a very sort of slow, incremental pace. All of this ties into the other reason that I've suggested keeping, an analysis of your current writing skill and not doing this before at least year 4 of your writing is your odds of publication are low. I just mentioned that. And so if that's the case, if you're going to work on a novel, right? Work on a short story, whatever it might be, but I'll just assume a novel here because it is a significant amount of time. Taking 6 months off to write a novel, it's going to be very, very difficult to perhaps justify that to yourself if that novel is not going to get published. If even putting 6 months of work into it, you probably won't be able to get that novel published. At least not at that point. It would take several years more of perhaps revision to get to that point. Do you want to do that? Do you want to sort of take 6 months off to work on a project that has a very low chance of being published? It's certainly in its current state, right? Do you want even taking several years to revise it? Would you be okay taking 6 months off to write and not seeing perhaps that payoff for a while? Again, one of the reasons why I sort of did the sabbatical here was I was very confident in both the project I was working on, that new novel, and also the one for the publisher. That came through as I was going through the sabbatical, but I was pretty confident that I could get some sort of publishing deal on that book. So I took it because I anticipated some sort of some sort of reward at the end of this, some sort of payoff in a sense, right? Some sort of reward for my work in the relative short term. It was not something I was thinking about, perhaps like 4 or 5 years down the road, finally getting this thing published. I was thinking, okay, by the end of this whole thing, I'll have a work that has at least at least a coin toss basically of getting published, right? At least 50-50 chance of perhaps getting published, and that's again why I'm reiterating that waiting on your current skill, waiting until you're a bit more advanced in your writing first before that. And now going into the project game plan. Do you actually have a game plan for this in terms of your projects? Do you know what you want to work on? Do you have a novel in your head already that or an outline novel? Do you know exactly what you want to do and what you want to achieve in that time period? If you say you're going to take a 6 month sabbatical, do you know what you want to have at the end of it? Is it something where if, say for example, you have you want to do a novel, right? Say at the end of the 6 months, you want to have 2 drafts of a novel done. Say you want to write something from complete scratch to completely on the 3rd draft of a novel. That is a viable thing. That is viable in the sense that you know what you want to do. And then you have to also examine historically, have you been able to pull that off? Do you reasonably think that at your current skill level, that at your level of research, at how much you've outlined the story, etc., that you have enough information already available to you that you could just pen a novel in 6 months? You could pen 2 drafts of a novel in 6 months. Some people they can. Some people tend to wing it. You have people that are pantsers that will spend much more time, perhaps writing a novel than they think. They start out. This used to be me very early in my process, where I would start out thinking this novel was going to take me maybe 3 months to maybe get a first draft done. All of a sudden, it turns into like a 6 month venture because I didn't plan ahead. I didn't have my novel outlined. I had to make sort of corrections. I had to sort of steer the ship one way, bring the ship back, readjust, and all that sort of thing. So do you have some sort of game plan for what you want to work on? Have a clear outline and idea of what that project's going to be? And historically, have you been able to get projects done in this time frame? Can you get something done within a reasonable range of time? And to be honest, a good estimate is just doubling it. So in other words, if it takes you a year to maybe get 2 drafts of a novel done, then without working a day job with just the free time, yeah, you could probably get it done in 6 months. You could probably have that, or double that, however you want to view it, in terms of the workload. That's a pretty good estimate, to be honest, is to kind of go with that. Like go with either with, hey, if it takes me this long, I can probably get it done in about half that time. So again, do you have a game plan? Do you know what you want to work on? Other consideration is, can you hit this deadline? Right? Have you been able to complete projects on a deadline before? Have you been able to meet your own personal deadlines? Kind of ties into what I said a minute ago. Have you been able to do that? If you haven't been able to necessarily hit deadlines before, if you have a difficult time with that, I would first, again, develop the skill and the habit of being able to work on these deadlines first. Because again, it's going to be very, very demoralizing if you plan to get 2 drafts of a novel done in, say, 6 months, and you get to the 6 month mark and perhaps you haven't even gotten the first draft of it done. Now, you might be someone that's okay with that. This is, again, goes back to the personality thing. Perhaps you have a personality where that's okay. You will consider that to be maybe a partial victory. Maybe you will say, yeah, I didn't get the second draft I wanted done, but I got almost a first draft of this novel done. I was being a little bit ambitious, and I'm okay with that. If you are, then excellent. But again, the biggest thing is to reduce the amount of regret you're going to have with this at the end of it, because Coming on the other side of this now, I can tell you that if I didn't hit a lot of these goals, if I was not getting, both novels completed, or at least, 2 drafts of one novel completed and finishing the novel, if I could not have done both projects and got as much done as I did, I would feel defeated. I would feel like I kind of had wasted that opportunity in a sense. So again, goes back to your personality, but I really do emphasize being able to hit deadlines first before doing this. And then the last 2 points here before I get to the final thing is more of the logistics, specifically the financial. This is the main one. This is the biggest part of the whole thing, really. You got to save. You have to save, and you have to plan this out very long term. As far as recommendations on savings go, what worked for me and what I suggest is saving for 1 1/3 the amount that you will need. And I do this in terms of months. So I don't necessarily do like total amounts of money. I do it in terms of months. So, for example, if you plan to take a 6-month sabbatical, you want to have a savings fund of about 8 months, right? 1 1/3 amount of that time, right? Reason why is if you're going to go into this job or to the sabbatical basically without a job and you're looking for work, you're going to need to have perhaps a bit more experience because you may not find a job right away. You may get to the 6 months of sabbatical, start looking for work and can't find it. Extra 2 months is going to be very, very helpful. And I guess this will tie into something in a minute, but planning ahead as far as looking for work, being willing to cut your sabbatical short. I myself got the job that I'm going into relatively quick. I had planned on maybe making this a 6-month adventure, so I planned on maybe making this into July. I had anticipated perhaps even getting into the fall, July, August. I had saved that much up because I anticipated I may not be able to find work right away. I got very lucky. I just happened to have found a position at a company that did something that the job became available that I liked, that I was qualified for. It just ended up working out. Other people probably not be that lucky. You may not get as lucky with that. So 1 1/3 is usually what you want to do. And again, it's easiest to do it months for me. That's how I view it. Just, all right, how much do I need to save to live off of for 1 month? All right, cool. How many months do I want to do this? Multiply that 1 1/3. And this also ties into as well thinking ahead. I didn't put this on the board, but thinking ahead in terms of planning this out very far in advance. It took me 18 months of savings to do this. I started planning this out in the summer of 2020 is when I became serious about doing this. And I had planned this out all the way back then. So I spent 18 months saving up just small incremental amounts until I had enough savings that I knew I could go for potentially, 3/4 of a year. What was my anticipation? Could I go 9 months basically? What was kind of my thinking here? That's how much I saved up for, with the idea that I probably wouldn't go 9 months. I saved up for 9 months with the idea that probably around 6 months I'd be back in the workforce. That was my thinking at the time. That's how much I saved up. That's what I did. Okay. So again, thinking ahead, planning this out years in advance is really, really, really crucial here. Which again should go back to the earlier point of, if you're someone maybe 2 or 3 years into your writing and you're thinking that you're doing this, that is awesome, because perhaps you save for 2 or 3 years to do this. By the time you hit year 6, right, your writing is probably going to be stellar. If you're writing consistently, your writing is probably going to be stellar. At least, and when I say stellar, I mean publishable. You'll probably be by year 6 somewhere around the ability to get published in some sort of sense, at least being competitive to do that. That's the time to take advantage of this. When you have the skill already there, that's the time to take advantage, because that's when you can get the most done and take the most away from it. And now the last part is career. This is something where, again, if you're lucky, if you have a job that allows sabbaticals or you can take time off, great. And you're able to, say to your boss, listen, I'm going away in 6 months, do I still have a job, right? There are some companies that allow that. Again, I am aware that not many do. There are not a whole lot, but there might be some. For everyone else, including myself, are you okay changing careers? That's the main thing. Are you okay changing up your day job? If you view it the way I view it, I tend to view my careers as day jobs. They're not something where I I don't derive my identity or my attachment or my feeling of this is the kind of person that I am from my job. This is not that I don't work jobs necessarily where I think I'm gonna do this my whole life. That's not really how my mentality is. My mentality very much is what supports my art. I'm thinking always in terms of my art first. My art is my writing. What supports that? Can I get jobs that can support that? That's how I think. So are you okay switching careers? Some people are not, right? Taking 6 months off from maybe a more lucrative type of career, that could be, a 6 month gap on your resume could be very detrimental. For other people that maybe are working a bit more kind of lower class wage slave type work, I don't know how else to say it. It's a little bit easier, right? If you're someone perhaps that's working as a cashier somewhere, and you're able to maybe take a sabbatical, obviously finding a cashier job relatively easy. More skilled jobs, bit more difficult. Other consideration too, and this is sort of why I perhaps tended to work out better, is where are your skills as far as the workforce goes? In other words, do you have a set of skills where you can quit your job and those skills can translate over to another job very easily? That's kind of what happened with me. I happened to have worked in a job and left it, but because I had degrees in certain areas and skills in certain areas, I was able to get a job in sort of the industry that I wanted because of that. I had sort of developed this sort of skills basically where I was able to get a job in that industry even after taking several months of a gap in my resume. Again, just something to consider is how valuable are your skills and where you're at. It's a lot to consider, but just being aware of that. And again, I'm sure there are plenty of people that hate their jobs that say, yeah, I could leave this job, I could never do this again, and I can find something else and be pretty cool with it. That's awesome. That's the kind of person that probably does very well with a sabbatical. Last point on that is income. The job you get after might pay less. Again, my scenario right here. I left a job and I was making a fair amount of money. I am taking another job now where I'm making okay money. Not bad by any means, but not making as much as I was making before. Partly because I don't have the tenure in my company that I did before. Partly because the job I'm doing, it's a little bit different. It's along the same lines of it's a little bit different from what I was doing prior. Again, I mentioned the skills and sort of the degrees in these sort of areas to allow me to do that, but unfortunately the job I'm going into, I'm making less. I am fine with that. For me, that's not a big deal. That's not something that's detrimental to me, but for some people it could be. Again, something to consider. And finally, we're into the last point I threw up here, off the grid. And this is my tip. This is my biggest tip for people that consider doing this. If I had one piece of advice beyond logistics, if I took all the logistics away and you were going on a sabbatical, you said, yep, I'm going to do this. I did everything else on this list here. What's something that helped you during the whole process off the grid? And this is what I'm talking about. You will get the most amount of work done when you are focused on that solely. When I took the sabbatical, one of the big things was I decided to go off grid. You saw me take my solo retreats, for example, where I was literally, in some ways, off the grid. I had very little cell service. I had a little bit of Wi-Fi, basically, so I uploaded some videos there. Middle of nowhere, cabin in the woods. I had done that. You saw me do those before. But off the grid also means not being available, right? Not being always on Facebook, not being not being as big of a part of your local society in a sense. Kind of a weird way to phrase that, I admit, but I talked about this in my video, I think it was called Underground, where I said being on a sabbatical kind of feels kind of like a death in a sense, because I'm not seeing as many people, I'm not visiting as many friends, I'm not going to as many functions or gatherings anymore. I am focused solely on my work here. I'm basically taking a time away where I'm putting the entire world around me on pause. I'm not watching TV. I am not watching the news. I stopped following a lot of the news during this whole process. I'm not following the news as much. I'm not going to be as active on social media. I'm not going to be on Facebook all the time. You're not going to see me as much. There's a lot. You need a period basically where you are isolated, of doing what Cal Newport in his book Deep Work talked about. The idea of deep work, the idea of solitary confinement, really, where you can just focus on this. I understand some people don't have the personalities for that. Some people need to have that kind of interaction. And I'm not saying you can't. I'm not saying you can't hang out with your friends, your family, and all that stuff. I certainly did. But I'm saying I did it less. I did social gatherings left. I made decisions that made me kind of a hermit. Like now, I'm now just talking to a certain select group of friends now again. They haven't heard from me in freaking forever. And I'm like, yeah, sorry I went away, guys, for a bit here. Now you guys are hearing back from me again, right? It's just, it is what it is. You have to sort of be isolated. Long periods of isolation away from the world are what you need. And this is the perfect thing. Like, if you can do this one trick and just stay isolated, you can stay kind of away from the world, your focus on your craft will go up and your skill goes up immensely. That's the biggest thing I took away from this whole thing, really, was just the ability of being very isolated and focusing solely on the craft. But all right, so that is it. That is kind of my entire spiel here. If you enjoyed this, certainly let me know. Put down the comments. If you have any kind of question, any other considerations I didn't cover, let me know. This is very, very immense. This is not something. This requires a good amount of thought. Again, this is much kind of informational, sort of entertainment, informational, but it's important to keep in mind that these are very serious life considerations here. I do not want to underplay that at all. These are like, to leave a job for 6 months, 5 months, whatever. That is a huge thing. That is a huge, huge, huge consideration. So do not do this lightly either. These are things to consider if you decide to do it, but again, this is a very immense life sort of changing decision. It can be, and it doesn't always work out. This is not quite the same as like telling somebody, I suppose, to like quit their job and live their dream, because it's a finite amount of time that you're putting into this. You're not gonna, quit your job forever. You're at some point, the anticipation is that you'll go back into the workforce and go back to the day job. So, but keeping that in mind, this is immense. This is something to be considered very, very carefully. So I do not want anyone going out there and tomorrow quitting their job and taking a sabbatical, because it requires a good amount of forethought. But if you're someone that maybe the idea of this has sort of played around your head, that maybe you'd like to take maybe some time away from the working world, this is what I would suggest. I would suggest going here first, developing these areas, making sure that you've hit this, and then putting things into action where perhaps you could pull that off. All right. So again, any additional questions, let me know, put it in the comments, and I'll get back to you.